Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Secure Talk. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of Secure Talk. Today, we're going to be talking to the co-founder and CEO of Anonybit, Francis Zelazny, and we're going to be talking about decentralized biometrics infrastructure, privacy by design, and more. But first off, let me welcome Francis. Francis, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. And where do we find you at today?
I am in very cold New York City.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I'm in very cold, dark, damp Seattle, Washington. So I think, what do they say? Misery loves company. And
yeah.
So we
do we want to have a competition on the weather?
Well, we've had record rain, not snow. We have had quite a bit of snowfall, not records, but we've had record rain this year, which everybody says, oh, it keeps things green. But to me, it's kind of annoying.
I hear you.
Tell me your horror story for the New York winter. What's going on out there?
It's been up and down, but hopefully I think we're gearing up for more rain and snow in the next 24 hours. So, we're just between COVID and the weather, we're staying put and indoors. And maybe that's a good segue for what we're going to talk about.
It might be. And on an optimistic front, aren't we getting close to Groundhog Day here? So hopefully things will, take a turn for the better.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we are here to talk about, like I said, decentralized biometrics infrastructure, privacy by design, and, a little bit about what Anonybit does. First off, let me ask you, because you are the CEO and co-founder, why another security company? What was the impetus to bring Anonybit into creation?
Yeah, so Anonybit is really at the nexus of two industries: security as well as identity and privacy. As you well know, there's often a trade-off that we make between security and privacy, and we tend to give up one for another. And we see this in many facets of our lives. And Anonybit is really here to say you don't need to make these trade-offs. We actually can have both privacy and security, protecting our personal data as well as our assets and our networks.
Well, before we dig into the specifics of that, maybe you can give an example or explain that a little bit further, because usually when we talk about trade-offs, what I've heard is, we have a trade-off between productivity and privacy and security. I haven't heard the trade-off so much as between privacy and security, because they typically, from what I see, they typically kind of align. Where do you see the two kind of playing off each other or coming into some sort of conflict?
So I'll give you, and I know we're going to talk a lot more about this, but in the world of cryptocurrency and NFTs, part of the appeal is that these are democratized uses of money, of trade, of assets, and whatnot. And nobody is a central owner of the data that flows through these systems, both the assets themselves and also the personal information that flows through these systems. And so that means that we have a lot of private ownership when it comes to cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, but that also means that there is no central custodian or manager of those assets. So just put it simply, if a hacker guesses your private key or your password for your crypto wallet, where is the accountability and who's to know that it was an attacker and not you? And so these questions arise every single day, and that's probably the most I would say the most common one right now for your listeners. But this example is playing out in many other more technical aspects, like if you use your Face ID on your phone, it might be more private because the entity that is accepting that Face ID from your phone. Really, you're not enrolling your biometrics with them. They're just relying on it from your phone. But then a hacker can circumvent that process because the organization doesn't know who's behind the phone. So there are many, many, many ways that this plays out.
Well, it's interesting because I've never really thought about that. And I think the example with crypto it's obviously hugely relevant and important because we get the privacy with these kind of anonymous transactions and trading, but we are sacrificing potentially some of the security that would come with maybe having our coins held in a more secure environment or having some kind of redundant security there to protect them. So I actually, to be honest with you, I've never even thought about that.
I'll give you another example.
Please do.
Another example is I could take your credit card and put it in my Apple Pay. And my Face ID is attached to my Apple Wallet. I can make a transaction and nobody will ever know it's not you. Because that credit card is not attached to any biometric data. The bank doesn't know that it's not you. The merchant doesn't know that it's not you. And I just kind of used my Face ID from my phone.
Note to self, do not give Francis your credit card. Okay. So, no, that's pretty scary. So let me ask you, obviously, I think most people understand what biometrics are. But when you talk about a decentralized biometrics infrastructure, can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so in the world of biometrics, we have something called a template. A template is a mathematical representation of your biometrics. So it could be your face, your finger, your iris, your voice, and typically that mathematical representation is sitting in a holistic form in order to use for a match. So that's essentially what Face ID does or Touch ID does on your phone. And the template is stored in a secure vessel, if you will, inside your device, and it never leaves. But as I just explained, just because it's sitting in a secure vessel on your device doesn't mean that the whole process behind, in the background is secure, because it can be circumvented. It's not that somebody's going to break into your phone and steal that template. It's the fact that the process can be circumvented. So when we talk about decentralized biometrics, we're talking about breaking up that template into what we call anonymized bits. These are encrypted, meaningless pieces of this biometric, otherwise, biometric vector or template. And these anonymized bits get stored throughout a peer-to-peer network of nodes. We use multi-party computing and a concept called zero-knowledge proofs in order to make sure that the information is distributed in a manner where we can do both the storage and the matching in a decentralized way. And nothing ever needs to come back together ever again, even for matching. And so this is the way the infrastructure allows us to authenticate somebody's identity without having that template sitting in any one place. So you actually, with Anonybit, you get all of the privacy benefits of having the phone or the device-based biometric, with all of the security benefits, because we can integrate into existing workflows, whether it's cryptocurrency or NFT or a bank or retailer or any other authentication workflow. We can integrate into the onboarding process, so that when somebody does want to do an authentication or down the line account recovery, the entity actually knows who's behind the transaction.
Wow. And I can think of, and I might be right or might be wrong on this, but I can think of all kinds of useful applications for this. So, for example, if you're a bank and you want to use some type of biometric, authorization, having a database of all these templates could actually be a liability. A liability from one, obviously, if it's hacked. Two, even from like the PII and some of like requirements under GDPR and some of the other regulatory bodies out there, having that information would be at some point, both, it's an asset in terms of it helps you to kind of validate who's who's accessing your platform, but it's a liability in terms of that it's really sensitive data, and if you lose it, there's obviously some cost that will go along with that. So would Anonybit, would that solve those kind of liability type issues with the data, because you no longer you don't have those templates in one piece, if that's what I'm hearing?
Well, that's exactly correct. So we're essentially able to meet all of these data protection requirements. There are a couple of aspects there. One is data minimization, and the other is privacy by design. So we're able to do both through our decentralized infrastructure. I mentioned zero knowledge proofs before. This is essentially how we're doing it. So we're breaking it up, and we're also leveraging zero knowledge proofs so that there's no central place there's no single point of failure. There's nothing for an attacker to find, nothing for an attacker to steal, but you can still verify who somebody is when they're transacting. So from a GDPR perspective, we're really solving a couple of problems. One is minimizing the risk of a data breach. Number two, making sure that only the right people have access to their data. And this is a big win for enterprises, banks, retailers, again, that all want to or need to, for other regulatory reasons, maintain personal data, but want to eliminate or reduce the risk of a potential data breach. I mean, nobody wants to be the next headline, right? And
Right.
any personal data is just like a hot potato today. So just get rid of it. And how do I do it?
Yeah, and it's interesting. Under GDPR, a lot of companies are under the assumption that when we talk about PII, they're talking about data, whether that's HR records or credit card information or social security numbers or whatever it is. But not everybody is aware that it could be just images, right? And some of these biometric templates that you're talking about, that is PII. If you can attach that to a natural citizen of the EU, then it falls under GDPR. But one of the exclusion areas is law enforcement. So if law enforcement has a justifiable reason to acquire that PII and store it, they're given a few kind of, I wouldn't call them loopholes, but they're given a hall pass to go ahead and do that. At the same time, I think with a lot of people, even the law enforcement agencies, but just the regular people, would feel a little bit concerned that that any agency out there would have that information stored someplace because it's potentially vulnerable to hacks, etc. Do you work with any law enforcement agencies, or do you see that as a potential market?
Yeah, so I think you covered two. So there are two different aspects of this. One has to do with the legitimate purpose for the collection. And there are multiple reasons why an entity would collect personal data, whether it's biometrics or any other PII, right? A name, a phone number, an email address. And by the way, the Anonybit infrastructure can support any kind of personal data or digital asset. We do have two products. One that's more for authentication, leveraging the biometric, and the other one is what we call the digital asset vault, which is for crypto keys and master passwords and backup passphrases. But you could also store emails and phone numbers and other things in there. So that was kind of an aside, just to clarify. But there are two aspects when it comes to GDPR. So one is the consent and the reason for the collection. So consent is one of them, legitimate use is another. It could be, as you said, law enforcement. There's 6 different reasons that go under the legitimate use, and consent is one of them. The second has to do with the storage aspects, which is what you're talking about. Where is the data and how is it stored, and how do you prevent a breach? Just because you obtain consent doesn't absolve you of responsibility if there is a data breach, by the way. So there's 2 different aspects. In the GDPR, the Illinois law is solely focused on consent and is silent on the data breaches, where California is a combination. So they're different. The data protection and privacy landscape is very, very hodgepodge, and is very, very confusing. But just like if we're gonna just have the lowest common denominator, it's 2 things. One is consent, and the other is storage and preventing data breaches. Anonybit is taking care of the second aspect, and nobody is immune from a data breach. So the US government itself was breached about 5 years ago. There are about 5 million fingerprint templates of US employees and contractors that were stolen, along with all of the other PII. Just more recently, the government of Argentina was hacked. Their entire national database is essentially available on the dark web. Albania also, there have been questions swirling around other governments, India, Pakistan, and others. There have been obviously DMVs that have been breached. So this is not theoretical, and whether it's a law enforcement or a national registry or a bank or a healthcare institution or even the small business, we are all vulnerable. It is not enough to just have a legitimate use for collection. It is also, we are all, it is incumbent on all of us to think about how we actually store and manage all of this personal data. And that's really, Anonybit is getting to the heart of this, of all of this.
Well, you mentioned all these different attacks, and one of the most common attacks these days that affects everybody from individuals all the way up to the largest companies and organizations in the world is ransomware attacks. And how does Anonybit kind of either prevent or assist in the recovery after a ransomware attack?
So it's really, the most ransomware attacks are caused by phishing and the use of stolen credentials. So let's take a step back, right? What exactly happened? Somehow they trick someone into clicking on a link, or some other way they get access to the network where they plant that malware. And so this just, again, going back to the root of the problem, if we're not using weak authenticators and we're not using passwords, the likelihood of these attacks in the first place goes down. So it's really, it's all of this is very, very overwhelming. But if we look at all of these attacks, they all have the same thing in common, and that is weak authenticators. Whether it's SIM card swaps, ransomware, or these government hacks, somebody is getting in and using stolen credentials in order to perpetuate the attack. In order to solve this problem, we need to get rid of weak authenticators. We need to get rid of passwords. We need to get rid of knowledge-based authenticators. We need to get rid of device-based authenticators that can be circumvented, and use biometrics, which are the only link between a person and their identity. And there are many, different ways to skin that cat. But when it comes to, biometric storage and the data around that, back to the beginning of, what Anonybit is trying to solve, is the custodian of that biometric data and all the personal data. This is what Anonybit enables. And then you can apply that to preventing phishing attacks, preventing account takeovers, preventing SIM card swaps, protecting NFT accounts, and so on and so forth.
Excellent. Now, when you talk about, doing away with some of the more traditional auth systems, passwords, for example, and then just going direct to biometrics, would you still advocate some kind of a second factor authentication, or is just one biometric auth sufficient?
So there are many different ways to do second factor authentication. You can add a real secret. So not your mother's maiden name and your favorite color, but you can.
You guessed it.
you can deploy a real secret that you protect. You can use a secondary biometric as a second factor. You can attach. You can link on the back end a biometric to a device very silently. So you actually are not using the device as the identifier, using the biometric as the identifier, and then you do it the reverse. So there are many different ways to incorporate two-factor or multi-factor authentication, but the biometric should be the primary, not the excuse for convenience, which is essentially what most of the deployments of biometrics are today.
And how and everything you say just totally makes sense. But how does Anonybit integrate with some of the leading platforms out there? And I'm obviously thinking about M365 and any of the other major platforms. Is it just like a plug and play auth solution, or how does it work?
Yeah, so all of these platforms, they're most of them are not biometric native. They either rely on an outside authenticator or a device-based authenticator, and an Anonybit essentially will be the cloud-based authenticator. It could be part of these platforms, or it could be as a plugin. There are different standards that can be used. What our solution is doing is we have an SDK that captures and breaks the biometric down on the front end, and then we have an API that sends the yes or no response on the back end. So this is really how we integrate, and it's very, very standard with other types of other authenticators.
And are most of your conversations right now with enterprise customers or government organizations, or are you working primarily through partners?
So it's really a combination. Our products are meant to be used by embedded partners as well as end users. There are many different reasons why an end user will work with us directly versus through a partner. Our mission is to enable the ecosystem, so we're agnostic in that respect. There are some entities that prefer to own and manage the tech stack themselves. For example, they will take the API response and they will manage, however they want to do the orchestration. Other type of entities just want a total solution, and they don't want to think about, all of the different components. So we are the decentralized biometric cloud infrastructure, and there are some tools that we provide for end user organizations that want something more turnkey for sure, but it's both.
Okay, and let's just imagine that I'm a potential enterprise customer, maybe 10,000 seats, and we're having an initial conversation. What are some of the questions that you're going to ask me to qualify whether or not I'm a legitimate prospect for Anonybit?
Well, I generally want to know, how are you handling account recovery today? How are you managing authentication today? Where are the gaps? Are you worried about storage of personal information? What kind of personal information, are you storing? Are you getting bogged down with password recovery needs? So there are two clear drivers for why people care about Anonybit. One is what we talked about before, the GDPR, the potential liability with storing and managing personal data, and the other has to do with seamless authentication and ensuring that who you're transacting with. And by the way, this could be online. It could also be in the physical world. So think about frictionless payments at the checkout. Think about access control to a data center, as well as trading cryptocurrency. So there are the problem of ensuring strong authentication while maintaining the highest levels of data protection cut across many different use cases. Okay,
great. And let's say if I was a potential enterprise customer and I said, hey, this platform looks really interesting, but I am curious in terms of, the kind of the security signal that comes that the platform can deliver. For example, anomalous behavior. Do you track certain events or flag certain events that say, hey, you know what, this looks a little bit weird. This in terms of maybe the type of authorization requested, or the location, or the frequency, or anything like that?
So we're really focused on the biometric authentication, which is, are you who you claim to be? There are other solutions that are specifically designed for behavioral analysis, or there are other technologies that look for behavioral anomalies. We are specifically in the biometric authentication realm, which is, again, are you who you claim to be? And I should just add, and I know we're on time, but I should just add that that it's the biometric that is the strongest link to answer that question of whether you are who you claim to be. Everything else are you know, substitutes or, potential indicators, but they don't get to the heart of, who you really are.
Right. And I'm just curious on the biometric side, do you have any kind of scalability? And scalability is not the right word. What's the word? Settings to determine, okay, this is a 90% match or it's an 88% match. Some kind of control to give you some latitude in terms of what's an exact match or an acceptable match, or is it just fixed?
So this is in the world of biometrics. Biometrics by definition are probabilistic.
Okay.
So the way it works is that the data is distributed over these different nodes, and then the calculation happens across the nodes. So if we get a certain amount back, then there's a confidence level that it's a match. And we're doing it in a decentralized way, but traditional biometrics are essentially doing it in the same way. It's always a probabilistic measure of a match, and then usually the enterprise will decide, okay, at what point do I say yes or no? Think of it like a metal detector at an airport, right? Like you raise the sensitivity or you lower it.
Right. And no, and I've just personally have had issues with, and I don't know if I don't shave that day or whatever it is, but I've had certain platforms that have been very, very sensitive, and other ones that just pretty much, I think anybody could sit in front of the computer and get access. So it's and maybe it depends on the value of the assets that I'm trying to access. But yeah, so what you're saying is the enterprise can somewhat they can determine the sensitivity or set the sensitivity.
Yeah.
Great. Well, hey, let me ask you, step back a little bit and talk about the business side of things. So when did you start Anonybit? Where are you at? What was it like to go out and look for investors in that process? And then, and then where are you at right now?
So Anonybit, depending on how you count, is like my 12th startup. So I'm pretty well versed in how these processes work, and I don't think this one was any different. I think that the process is reaching out to people, explaining the vision, making sure that people understand they're and this is a pretty crazy investment climate, as both on the seed side of things and on the larger round side of things. So it was pretty crazy to figure out which was the right type of partner. But at the end of the day, I was really looking for the right type of partner, because I think, again, this is my first rodeo, and at this point I knew that what I really wanted was a foundational partner, a partner that was going to help us put the fundamentals of the business together in place this year, because we want to do this in a calculated manner and not just kind of go whiplash and be schizophrenic about how we build the business. So there are very specific milestones that we want to reach, and we're trying to do this in a deliberate way. And we were very I just think that Switch Ventures and the team that and Next Gen Venture Partners and others are really they're really the right partners for us at this juncture.
Excellent. And any exciting or imminent announcements for 2022?
You'll definitely have to stay tuned, because, as I said, we're doing this in a very deliberate way, and I think a lot of what I was talking about in terms of the vision of eliminating the potential for data breaches by eliminating the essential honeypots of data all around, providing digital and trusted interactions, putting consumers at the heart of their data, and not giving up privacy and security involves many things. So I think that as we roll out, a lot of things will become apparent, but it's all going to be based around that vision.
Awesome. Last question. Well, until I think of another one, but so do you see Anonybit as being a brand that consumers will recognize and feel kind of an affinity or safe, have an aura of safety when they're using it, or do you see Anonybit being as part of just a bigger overall solution, and that more of like a B2B brand that companies want to kind of incorporate in their security infrastructure?
I think that's an excellent question. I think that Anonybit eventually will become a brand in the sense a brand that consumers recognize as a trusted platform that the businesses they work with use. So, think of it as like the Intel Inside, right? So we want to be like the brand that all enterprises rely on to protect the personal data of their customers and their employees.
No, I think that's, God, there's potentially a huge kind of marketing message opportunity there because, every day we're asked to provide biometric information and our voices are being recorded, our behavior, our key, how we use the keyboard, everything's being recorded. And oftentimes we're aware of it, but we kind of, it's kind of the price of entry to, use different apps, et cetera. But I think there's a lot of concern in the market, like where is this information, how is it being used and where is it being stored? And
exactly. And that's the big thing is that every day we're forking over our personal data. And the question is, where is it going? And every time there's a data leak and a data breach every single day, it's like, okay, we as consumers feel helpless.
Right. Well, hey, Francis, I've enjoyed this conversation and I've learned several things here. And it's one of the reasons I just love doing this podcast because I get to meet people like you and I get to learn new things and new perspectives. For example, the potential or the sometimes conflict between privacy and security, especially in the context of cryptos and NFTs, et cetera. But a lot of the other things you talked about in terms of the decentralized infrastructure, hugely important. I wish you and the Anonybit team a great and massively successful 2022.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I enjoyed this chat as well.
Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.